to kind of populate. Got two phones here. Let me see if either one of these can
Oh,
run down.
I'm going to put my phone on silent, make sure I don't get interrupted.
Let's see. All right, so we're here. Let's give it 2 seconds to sync. Chris Jones, hello from Minnesota. Chris, how you doing?
Hey, Chris. Chris
yeah.
is a amazing supporter. I see Chris at a lot of my talks, and always fun to run into our conferences, and
I love that.
And other things.
All right, so we must be up. If Chris is here, I see.
Wow, we have Saida from India. We appreciate you being up late in the evening to join. This is great.
Yes, actually, really late in the evening. It's not even.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, let's get started. I think we know the majority of you, or you know us. I'm James Felton Keith here with Inclusion Score. Paolo, you wanna?
And I'm Paolo Gaudiano with the Diversity and Inclusion Research Conference, and with also with ARC, Aleari Research Corp.
And let's see. Paolo and I met a few years ago, again, talking about diversity and inclusion from our various silos. He's teaching at NYU. You still at NYU?
Yes, part-time, but I'm still there.
Is at NYU. I'm at Georgia. And again, but we also, I don't know if this is TMI, we also live in the same neighborhood, though, here in New York. So we're regularly bumping into each other. Again, talking about diversity and inclusion. I like to say D&I for short because it saves me time, but I mean diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, justice, you name it, as the alphabet soup grows. And look, we run two separate conferences, the Diversity Inclusion Research Conference and Diversity Inclusion Service Management Forum. We want to talk to you all about those two events coming together. I'll let Paula go for a little bit and sort of talk about what the DIRC is. If folks aren't familiar, the DIRC, as we call it for short. I've participated in at least two. I may be wrong, but I think at least two. But, extraordinary event. I think, leader in the area as we've trying to, let me just sort of flatter Paula here for a bit, but it's not sugarcoating. I think in this space that we call inclusion, one thing that I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, we both kind of agree on, is there is a lack of professionalism. I don't mean that the people here aren't professionals, but I mean in industry standardized communication where we're using similar language. And so one thing that I think I saw early on that the DIRC was doing was trying to bring together a bunch of folks, not only academics, to discuss what exists, what works, what doesn't. And I think it was just a unique event relative to some of the other inclusion events that I've been to, which feel like more of a rah-rah session. Paolo's group and his partners have felt more like they wanted to get deep in the weeds to build solutions for other companies to use. Because as we think about inclusivity more broadly, it's kind of, if you were to wrap a fence around it and call it an industry, the most daunting industry that humanity has ever tried to construct, because it's really about all of us. It's not just like telecom or autos or energy supply. There are people everywhere, and so we're all dealing with that. And so anyway, Paula, it'd be great if you could let us know a little bit about what you have been doing the past. How many years? Has it been 7 years?
Yeah, it's been a while. So we started in 2018, and just kind of as a way, I always like to do this, and I think, James, you've seen me speak before. I always like to start by joking about I'm the white elephant in the room. Like what's a white guy doing talking about? And I've got all the privilege in the world. I'm white, male, cisgender, heterosexual. I've got literally all the privilege in the world. I've been working in this space since 2015, and I came into it because of my background in really quantifying the link between individuals and whatever societal context that we're operating in. So whether it was drivers on a highway or employees of an organization or whatever the case might be. And then about 9 years ago now, I had this vision. I thought, well, maybe some of this work that I've been doing could be helpful in helping leaders of organization understanding how and why it's to their own benefit to actually change the way that they manage people to be more inclusive, more diverse, etc. And I was very fortunate that early on I teamed up with a woman, Gilda Berabino, who is now the president of Olin College of Engineering. She used to be the dean of engineering at City College of New York, right around the corner from where we both are. And she's a phenomenal, she's just an incredible individual. And she actually invited me to work with her at City College. And we ended up starting a small research group. And we had an idea. We thought, hey, you know what? We're doing this work on quantitative approaches to DEI. Maybe there are other people around New York that are interested in this. And so in 2018, we launched our first meeting, and it was really more academic in nature. And all of a sudden, we had like 100 people show up. And we thought, wow, this is really generating a lot of interest. And so every year after that, we grew. We ended up doing part of it online, of course, then with COVID, to the point where we had several hundred people attending from all over the world. And really the goal of DIRC, the Diversity and Inclusion Research Conference, was always to have a solid grounding. You know, the research is very meaningful to us because we saw that a lot of people, you know, you use the word professionalism, and I think that sometimes maybe a different way of looking at it is that there is sometimes a lack of quantitative rigor, if you will. And I'm not suggesting, and you know, it's a very slippery slope because we're talking about human beings. So a lot of people object to like, oh, let's just turn people into numbers, and we don't necessarily want to do that. But I think one of the unique things that we bring to the table is the ability to maintain both, right? Maintain an understanding of the individual stories, but also combine them in a way that gives us qualitative and quantitative insights. And so the conference, you know, started as a more academic event, and then it became, hey, you know, we really want to bring in practitioners, we want to bring in people from industry, and we've had some amazing people speak. And you are actually possibly the only person ever who's spoken at more than one of them, because we always were very happy about refreshing content and bringing new people. And so this year, when, you know, you and I spoke, and I thought, you know, you're really doing something that is, to me, truly amazing. And I'm going to kind of put the shoe on the other foot, which is, you know, brag about the kind of amazing person that you are and the work that you're doing and why we decided to team up. And by the way, full disclosure, you came to me, what, 9 months ago and said, I think we should join forces. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And we met a couple of times, and I was like, you know, James, I think we should join forces. So credit goes to you for having that vision. But to me, what I always really appreciate about your work is the fact that a standard, you know, and I've had people say, oh, you know, we don't need more certifications. A certification for a standard is a very, very different thing. This is not about putting a rubber stamp on you that says, oh, you know how to do DI. You know, you've qualified by taking this course at Cornell University or taking this course over here. It's really about learning how, and I'm going to try to paraphrase you, James, and then you will correct me when you talk about it from your point of view. But what I saw is an amazing opportunity to explain to companies not really why DI is important, but if you're going to embrace it, what do you need to do? How do you treat it as a formal process within your organization so that you can learn what the piping looks like? Where does it have to go? How much of this do I need? How much of that do I need? And when I heard that, I thought this is absolutely crucial, because we basically at DIRC, we really focus on, let's validate the quality of the work that we're doing. Let's put numbers behind things. Let's put research behind it. Let's create collaborations between practitioners and academics and industry. And what I saw in your event was, how do we actually make that a very systematic approach? And that's why I was so excited when, you know, hey, let's do this. Plus, to be very candid with you, it's, you know, the timing is perfect, because it means that we move our conference up a couple of weeks and we avoid the election date, which is not a bad thing this year. And so, yeah, so super excited to be joining forces, and we can go into more detail, but why don't you go ahead and then, you know, maybe tell the rest of the audience, especially any of you that may have been to DIRC but not to the DISM forum, maybe tell them a bit about what that's going to be like and what to expect.
Yeah, no, I mean, wow, so much, but yeah, I'm glad you came around, and again that we were able to have multiple conversations about this, just because when I think about the daunting task of trying to engage all people who work everywhere, right? You just come into this place where you're like, this isn't even work as a business that you can really do on your own. There's no way to really participate in the market well enough, because it's just so large of a market, locale by locale, industry by industry, discipline by discipline, language by language. And I'm just seeing we've got some people here from Ghana and India and Latin America and New York and Minnesota, and y'all are really shocking me right now. I didn't know anyway, I thought it was just going to be a few people that we invited to the group chat. But that said, where we got to with the international standard, and it really, I'm guilty in that it wasn't totally my brainchild. As the standard came about, which took about 10 years, right? So there are people who've been doing this longer. than both of us who came together to say we at least need a consensus about what we mean when we say DEI. Just like as you and I throw on words like rigor and professionalism and quantification, we want to say let's start the same place. Even if we're going to change it tomorrow, we want to start with the same language. So we start there. That took 10 years. 2021 comes around, which is after you all already gotten started in 2017, 18, 19, you name it, where we thought the International Organization for Standards wasn't going to start distributing certifications itself. And we ran into a bunch of barriers between the French and the Brits and the Americans and the Brazilians and the South Africans and how they wanted to roll this out. And we immediately recognized gatekeeping. And, as a business guy, but also as, a bit of an activist, I just thought this needs to be democratized as far as who can lay its hands on it and modify it. And after being introduced to you all, I would say that was during the pandemic. Maybe it was 21, maybe before, I don't know. But
yeah,
around those years, I just thought if we can get these, and I went to another one of the events that was hosted in person, partially at NYU. I remember that. I was like, if we can get these academics at the table to chew on what we're doing as process engineers and business folks, then it will formally be democratized, where it's more than one org is owning it and critiquing it, and we're possibly arguing with each other, which I think could be a positive thing as we try to gain, again, and expand consensus. But for everyone who's not wholly familiar with what diversity inclusion service management is, or the ISO 30415 standard, is it's not just another long form assessment. It's a standard of questions across 4 big categories of all organizational operations. So that's governance, HR is obviously there, product delivery is there, and supplier diversity, what your supply chain is doing, is there. And for each question along the assessment trail, it triggers a series of deliverables, infrastructure-based deliverables. I know even that word infrastructure can be problematic. And when I think about what the people at the Diversity Inclusion Research Conference are doing, I think they've got this brain trust of practitioners who are doing extraordinary things in different silos of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And as an engineer and the folks at the DISM Forum, we just really want to design the piping for other organizations to understand how much of each type of consultant do I need. I think the real innovation of the standard has been to productize the type of services that we all supply to organizations globally with regards to diversity and inclusion. And by that, I mean in the 4 types. I mean, firms, again, like Paolo and his firm, myself and mine, we're either, number 1, training people to do something they don't know about. Number 2, helping companies collect data that they don't normally have, to quantify the qualitative. Or third, we're building what we call internal infrastructure. Those are focus groups like employee resource groups, things that validate what we're doing or give us accountability, make sure that we don't have a group of men planning the International Women's Day event, things like that. And last but not least is sort of the external infrastructure, like joining a chamber of commerce. It could be a disability chamber, a Latino chamber, Black chamber, women's group, you name it, or running a marketing campaign. These are all things that fit into diversity and inclusion. And we hire different service providers to execute all of them. What the standard does is it allows us to push through the piping of the standard all those many services. So if you are running a large, complex org or a tiny org, and I'm going to use engineering language here, the volume and the flow rate of that consultant that you need to push to your org to help it gradually change over time. Not overnight. It's not the end-all solution, but it is the tunnel, if you will, that we leverage to walk towards the light at the end. And so the difference between, I would say, this conference and other DEI conferences that put, famous people on stage to talk about their commitment to the others is we're going to spend 3 days in October deep in the weeds around the mapping of both the standard and the mapping of the industry. And on the latter, and I'll let Paulo go on this. I really think that the diversity inclusion research conference crowd is going to be omni-valuable in us mapping the industry so that we can tell any user, whether it's, Tata Motors or General Motors, I just want to be inclusive. Again, I see we got the Indian contingent here. No matter which big company it is, or Volkswagen Motors, right? Shout out to Europe. No matter who it is, we want to be able to tell them, here's the cadre of services that you need to gradually remedy what you do. And if you follow engaging them along the standard, you'll gradually get their best over time. And so what we want to do in October is really invite all hands on deck. I think that was our conversation here in New York,
Right.
is can we get all hands on deck so we can have the arguments well, document those, maybe even create academic literature out of it, and then spread that around the globe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I want to expand on that. Some of you who attended DIRC last year, which was last year was entirely virtual. The year before in NYU was hybrid. This year will again be hybrid because we'll be at University of Georgia, but we'll also be going live on LinkedIn for everybody that is not there in person. But one of the things that I think is going to be very exciting is the idea of creating these maps, as James mentioned, of really trying to get and everybody to contribute, of essentially identifying and helping to categorize what the services are. The other side of it, which is what has really been driving most of the passion of the work that I'm doing, is that I spent my entire DEI career for the last 9 years or so with one very important goal. How do you convince the chief the chief executive officers, because the chief diversity officers and other leaders in DI, they know the value, they understand the value, but how do you convince the chief financial officer, the chief executive officer of the value for their organization? And some of you that came to DIRC last year also came to a couple of the meeting afterwards where we were thinking about using DIRC as a platform to come up with some sort of a guidebook, some sort of a way of helping chief diversity officers figure out what they need to know in order to convince their leaders. Now, working with James and with the DISM, what we realized that there's actually a very different opportunity way of doing that, because it's not enough to convince the leaders that it's the right thing to do, but you need to figure out how are they actually going to do it in a way that actually matches everything else that they do when they're running an organization. And if you look at every single function that a company runs, they have processes, they have procedures, they have standards that they follow. And if you're running IT, if you're, let's say, an IT service provider, then being certified with a certain ISO standard really helps you, because it means that the company knows exactly what you're offering, and you know exactly what you're offering the company and how you can plug into their system to make it work. And so we realize that actually having that kind of a framework in place is crucial for the success of the field of DI, not only for the people outside, like a lot of us who are providers who are providing services to companies, but for the people inside the companies that are trying to build trust from the leadership, they're trying to actually show the value of that. It's absolutely crucial. And so, as James said, it's going to be all hands on deck. There is going to be a couple of sessions where we're literally going to be talking about this map that we're starting to build out. For any of you that's familiar with advertising, digital advertising, there was a company called Luma Partners, and they built these Luma charts where you have a bunch of logos and you organize it in different ways to show what different people are bringing to the table. We're going to try to build a template of that. And then during the conference, we're going to be presenting that and inviting people to use an online form to submit their own data to help us to shape what that map actually looks like. So all of you who are working in DI in any space, it will help you to understand how you fit into the ecosystem. And then it will help also the leaders understand, how do I go and get the services that I need, which means more money for everybody, more importantly, more clarity and more of an ability to understand how we're going to make impact and how it's actually going to be beneficial to the organizations. So, and I see Linda is making some very good comments about the importance of the professionalization and democratization. Yeah.
A lot of words.
Yeah.
But again, I like your language around, and again, I was just on the phone right before this. We were preparing we're doing a big webinar in the UK with a few insurance providers. This one's with Gallagher in particular, and one of their national leadership, again, out in the UK, I was saying to their clients, one thing they try to provide from a DEI standpoint is clarity, right? And I was explaining to them what we're doing, because they're all coming to Atlanta in October as well. And as we were going back and forth, they said, yeah, if we can communicate to a client when they buy which service provider, like how much Ilaria, that's Paolo's company's name for anyone who's not familiar. When do we get that? And for everyone else, if you're a small service provider, or even if you're a big service provider, and everyone's trying to figure out when do I use them instead of me as COO of company X Googling diversity, and the first company that comes up, we just ask them, hey, do you know how we help ourselves? We want to be able to provide that path so you see what you need when, because the procurement team is going to need something a lot different than the HR team needs, and they're going to need something different than the product team needs. And so, yeah, having this process and making sure we're speaking the same language is how I think we get to that point where, and again, I get to some folks, this can be icky language, industrial DEI or industrial inclusion, right? By industrializing it, we have processes that we come back to and go, you know what? In 2026, the thing we were doing in 24 doesn't work. And I'll tell you why. And we want to debate that at the forum, again, with all hands on deck. I see Chris Jones asking about, does it usually start with data collection? I think it can. Or go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
No, I was going to say same thing. Is like it can, but I think that to me the point, and again, I don't want to paraphrase you correctly, but it's like the point is that data collection is one of the pieces, right? Somebody might argue that maybe unconscious bias training is the way to start, or racial sensitivity awareness training, or whatever the case might be, right? The point is that you probably, depending on what you're doing within the organization, you need different skills and different characteristics and different kinds of capabilities, and cataloging what all those things are, whether it is data collection. I mean, if you're, for example, you talked about product, right? Some of the biggest things that we hear in the news is like when, one of the, whatever it was, Prada, or, when basically every single major fashion company at some point or another has made a snafu where they made a product that was insulting a group of people or whatever. That's an example of where you don't need data. You need people that are working with the advertising team and with the product team. Yeah. They're going to make sure that you're not doing something stupid. Now, there may be some data behind that. But so I think the whole point is we're not going to tell people this is what you need to do. We're not going to tell people you need to collect data. You need to do unconscious bias training. You need to do whatever other kind of thing you want to do. It's more about making people aware of what are all the possibilities, and then giving companies internally the ability to figure out what they need for different capabilities, and then making sure that the experts know that they're going to be providing the right skill, the right resources at the right time for the right client. Because one thing that's been very frustrating for a lot of leaders that I've spoken to is that, yeah, we go and we hire a company, but it turns out that what they offer is not really exactly what we needed, and then there's a mismatch, and then people get upset and they get frustrated, etc. Right?
Well, even it's always not only seeing the mismatch. Sometimes they write RFPs, request for proposal, for anyone who's not familiar, and they don't know what to put in the RFP because they don't know what they don't know. And so sometimes I think the beginning of the standard can help them go, here's where we might want to start. Yeah, I've had a CEO come to me, obviously in my work, I meet a lot of CEOs. We're advising dozens of them. Maybe that's an understatement at this point because it started to get too many to manage. We're in the deep 3-digit space. And one guy came to me in my previous life. I helped build a few of the LGBT chambers of commerce here in the US, in the EU, in Scandinavia, in Africa. And so this guy came to me and said, I want to join the LGBT chamber, which I'm always, of course, an advocate for, because his kid came out to him. And it's June. It's like, while I'm an advocate for it, number one, your kid doesn't work at your company. You haven't identified the client for that service. Joining the LGBT chamber, which may cost a company of his size, it's like a $2 billion company. They charge him about $20K to play. Question is, who is the client that you're satisfying at that company? Is it an LGBT ERG? He said, well, we don't have one of those. I said, well, I already can tell you that's $20K wasted. If there's a contingent of disabled or Asian women or whatever at your company, and they have needs that they're available to articulate to you right now, build a process to digest those needs. That's the beginning of DEI. And then after that, what you want to spend on based on what they want, because they're at least organized. And that may be bias training that opens up a portion of the org, not the whole org, where they go, you know what? We need the Latino group. We need the LGBT group. We need the neurodivergent group. And now you're scaling. Now you're cooking with grease, where if you do join the LGBT chamber, which is a proxy of procurement, you don't send your procurement leaders there and they represent the organization in the wrong way, which may open you up to even more risk. So the process with which you go about engaging inclusivity matters as much as being passionate and wanting to hit the ground running, as I always hear on day one.
Yeah.
You might have to crawl a lot before you run. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
James, if I can bring in, there's also another topic that I think is it's the other kind of big elephant in the room, which is the backlash against DI right now,
yeah.
and I sometimes I tend to speak very candidly, and I hope I'm not insulting anyone, but one thing that I find really frustrating is I hear so many people in the DI space complaining that the backlash is because white people or white leaders are trying to grab on hold on to the power that they've worked so hard to keep, or because of systemic racism is fighting back, or white supremacy, and I have to tell you. Some of that is true, but a significant amount of backlash, in my opinion, and I've been writing about this for years and years and years, is because we as a field have yet to mature to the point where we can actually promise something, know how to actually measure what we're going to be doing, and then be able to actually show that we've made that progress and tell people what to expect. And I think that one of the things that's going to be absolutely critical at the joint conference is going to be to have very candid conversations about what has not been working, that we as a field have not been able to deliver. Because ultimately, if we create a product that is not satisfying the client, complaining about the fact that the client is stupid and yelling louder isn't going to help. And so I see this year as being an incredibly, incredibly important point, because we need to stop complaining about the backlash and trying to butt heads with it head on and saying, no, you're all dumb, and it's actually diversity is good, diversity is great. We need to be able to move beyond that and start putting not just numbers, but start showing people that there is a way to become very systematic about it, very serious about it, which is why I still think that the convergence of these two events is so important, because you're really getting both. You're getting the validation of the research on the one hand, and you're getting the systematic approach that is desperately needed to turn this into a mature, and yes, an industry to some people sounds like a bad word, but don't think of it as a big monolithic industry. Thinking of it as a mature field where everybody knows what they're contributing, and everybody's able to quantify that, and everybody's able to actually show that they're building towards something that is valuable for everybody. So I do hope there will be a lot of conversations about that. We cannot pretend that the backlash is not happening, but we need to fight it with the right tools instead of just trying to argue the same arguments that have not worked for the last 20 years and are going to continue to not work for the next 20 years.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I like that you. What was your language again? Mature industry.
A mature industry, or mature field.
Mature field. I really like that lingo. It works because, again, as a process engineer, that's primarily what I hadn't seen, and it's, again, to anyone who might push back on Paolo's comments, and I hear you. I think some things, because we are talking about inclusion, everything's available to be cringe. But the main thing I would say I agree with that he's saying is that every other industry is asking us for a more endowed product. That's all. They're saying, look, we see some things didn't work. The messaging has worked. It's gotten us here, but now we need something a bit more tangible, a bit more rigorous, that we can put into play in the same way that we have done every other fledgling profession that has evolved. That's just where we are. And I'll say this as a guy who runs a venture-backed software company, which is how we invest in these conferences. When I was going around to venture capitalists telling them we do DEI work and we work a bit in insurance and underwriting, and they're like, this doesn't make it, like, who cares? Is this real? Does this matter? And when I explain the problem in the couple of $1 trillion context that it is, because as we move into this tech infused era where we just have people monitoring processes, it is becoming more and more important that we engage and understand who our people are. And as we do that, the biggest void in the market is that we don't have a common speech, not just here in the United States or in New York City, but across the globe, in Colombia, in Germany, in France, you name it. So again, I think that's the big win. I think the other two big things that we'll have going on in October is we'll not only have the industry engineering nerds and the academic nerds, we're going to put two other groups really on display So I just left Madison, Wisconsin, and we were dealing with the federal government here and the federal government from the UK and all of the engineering professional societies. And they want to digest the standard and train their ranks in the standard. So they're going to come do some of that. We're going to get to critique how they do that in October, which is again why we really need the DIRC people there critiquing how we deliver education, right? How we do that from, I don't know if I'm using the right word. Is pedagogical the right word, or did I add too many suffixes?
Pedagogical. You got it.
Pedagogical, right. We want them looking at that. And the other thing that we're going to add is we have some friends from one industry. It just happens to be the insurance industry. And it's mainly because the insurance industry has been putting a price on a lack of inclusivity for about 20 years via certain insurance instruments like employment practice liability, management liability, directors and officers liability, errors and omissions liability. And so we got another conference that actually happens in August. It's going to come up, and they're going to be our guinea pig as we map an industry. So we're going to map our industry, which is DI. We're going to map the standard further to open it up to not just the people at the International Organization for Standards, but all the Europeans. And then last but not least, we're going to map an industry so that if you work in healthcare or autos or energy or advertising or academia or government, you can look at how we map this one industry and say, I want to do the same thing for my industry next. And we need to get a couple hundred people from whatever that industry is to mimic it so that we can push both our understanding of standardization through that industry and our new and growing knowledge of which companies are where through that. Because you'll get consultants who work in a certain type of training, for if we just use training as an example, that are just industry specific or they're just regional specific. So you'll do people who do bias training, but they only do it for healthcare, or they only do it for food service, or they only do it for academia. That matters.
Yeah.
As we try to say, we want to get everyone working that is in the industry, and we want to make sure you're deployed in the right place where you're not desperately filling out an RFP for the city of Baltimore, Maryland, when you do better working with the University of Iowa. I've had a consultant, actually the lead convener of the ISO standard when it was originally published, who's a Seattle, Washington guy, be recommended to be deployed to a company in Boston. They were like, we don't like the accent. Now, one could say that's not inclusive. And maybe it ain't. But sometimes you need to be able to digest the message the way that it's supposed to be digested so you can start on that path of inclusivity. So we do also want people to be able to engage this work from where they are. And so we don't want to sell a bunch of Americans to Brits and sell a bunch of Germans to Spaniards, etc. We want to make sure that everyone gets included. And that does matter to regional work as much as it does industry or discipline specific work. So,
yeah. So I think it's been about 30 minutes. We don't want to keep it for the whole hour. I think what I'd like to do is maybe James, we can wrap up. But I just want to give you a little bit in terms of the logistics. So the conference overall is going to be, well, there's going to be 3 days of events. It's going to be the first 2.5 days are going to be the forum, and James, you can give a little bit more sense of what that's going to look like. And then DIRC itself is going to be just like last year. We decided that half a day was really enough to get a lot of content. It's going to be a mixture of a few solo presentations, a couple of panels, a fireside chat. And so the DIRC part of the conference is going to be on the afternoon of Wednesday, October 30th. We're going to be again in person at the Terry School of Business at the University of Georgia in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're going to be live on Zoom as we've always been. Tickets for DIRC will go on sale in about a week or two. We're finishing up a few things. Those that participate in DIRC normally, you will actually, if you buy a DIRC ticket, you will then get a discount code to get very deeply discounted access to DISM and vice versa. So there will be kind of this reciprocal arrangement. We're hoping that a lot of people will take advantage of that to attend both parts of the conference. And I know that on the morning of the 30th, James, if I remember correctly, you and I are going to do kind of another joint conversation and talk about the mapping, right? So people that are, especially on the 30th, there will be a lot of overlap.
Yes. Yeah, so we're going to do that sort of, back and forth to talk in more detail about what we're doing. And again, we want everyone to participate in each piece. We'll again do the same thing, try to push the DISM folks to say do a deep dive with the dirt as a again get deeper into it on Wednesday. If you're looking at the bottom of the screen, if you go to dirc.info, again you can see more of their legacy, more about the different conferences. They got a bunch of videos, etc. up. Again, hit both sites, but yeah, the majority of that content will start on Wednesday afternoon. Um, for the and that's a Wednesday, Monday and Tuesday, which is October 28th, 29th. We're going to start with a deep training in the standard on that first day. We'll also have some breakout sessions about how to sell. We're going to run a session. I'm personally going to lead the session about how to generate $100,000 or more in sales using the standard. It'll be a bit, seedy and capitalistic, but we're going to go there. Then that evening, we're going to break. With that evening, we're going to do a kickoff with. I was just on the phone this morning with the chief diversity officer for the city of Atlanta, who works directly with that mayor. We'll get a big welcome from them and some of the consulate generals who are around the city from other cities. If you're not familiar with Atlanta, Georgia, it has the largest international airport in the United States. Very international city. I know that Paolo and I are both, New Yorkers, but Atlanta's much more affordable for everyone coming from everywhere. And we've got people confirmed from Peru and India and France and Canada and UK and you name it. Paolo, we do need to get some more Italians there. I need to reach out to people. But so that's day one. Day two, we're going to demonstrate the different mapping efforts that are going on. Again, mapping one, i.e. the standard, mapping two, the industry mapping, right, that Paolo and I were talking about earlier, and mapping three, an industry map out to understand where we want everything to go. That's going to be sort of the crux of these conferences coming together, debating about where we think things should go and refining how we codify where things go. And then day three, moving more into formal content, what implementation looks like. We've got a great lineup of folks who are implementing right now at their firms. We've got the chief diversity officer of Krispy Kreme coming, and we got folks from GE and insurance companies. So we're going to do a lot more of that on day three. And I just want to say one more thing in wrapping up. I see Chris talking about the Coca-Cola Museum. We actually were talking to some people from Coca-Cola and Delta as well. I'm sure we'll have some of their folks at the conference. If anyone's not familiar, they have big strongholds in that city. But there were two questions or comments that were given, one by Jeff Hutchinson, I think in Maryland, and another LinkedIn user about geopolitics, and we can't deprioritize the pushback that we're seeing. Here's what I'll say to that, because I agree with you. We don't want to deprioritize anything. I had a call from a former colleague and friend. We actually grew up together both in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan. She called me to say, hey, I think this work is over. We're done. This pushback, we can't beat it, which I thought, this is ridiculous what you're saying, because in reality, this work has always existed. If I just reference the United States of America, whether we were calling it civil rights, a bunch of years ago, or whether we were calling it Reconstruction after the Civil War, we've always been actively trying to figure out how to include people in the normal economy. And it's really because, and as the economist, engineer turned economist in the room, I like to remind people that our gross domestic product is really the incentive for DEI. So GDP is the incentive for DEI, and that's really about identifying who participates in our market. So the best pushback that we can give, even while a lot of us can write articles, I think Paolo writes for Forbes and so many other locations, all the academics should definitely go write more. But I think the most dangerous thing that we can do, and the most productive thing that we can do, is come together and codify what we mean by inclusivity so that we can design it and how we distribute it. The work that we're going to do in Atlanta, the work that we were doing in Wisconsin, the work that's going on in London and, Barcelona and, Mexico City, and you name it. In Johannesburg, we just wrapped up a cohort in Johannesburg, and coming in Mumbai next month. the work that we do to standardize and professionalize this space will create the type of permanence that we want to see. And another headline, while we will continue to do that work, I don't think, at least, and I'm available to argue about this with anybody, I think it'd be fun to do. I don't think that it'll go as far as us standardizing what we want to do, especially because some of y'all aren't even reading the whole article. Y'all just reading the headline, looking at the pictures. But we're going to keep writing. I'm going to leave that to Paulo and his crew. But we have to build more industry infrastructure. We have to industrialize. That's how we fight back. That's how we become a real foe to this conservative pushback. So
Yeah.
I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So I think maybe we can wrap up and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Any questions about either of the events, or any questions about what we were talking about? And otherwise, we certainly don't need to keep everybody here for a full hour, especially those of you that are dialing in from places like India. Ghana, I guess it's not too late yet, but India, it's very late at night. So
yeah. And for Chris Jones, we're going to add the Coca-Cola Museum to the. We're gonna figure that out. So those evenings, but
there's a lot of other amazing places in besides from the Coca-Cola Museum. There's some pretty amazing places in Atlanta. So yeah,
we'll have a list of them for anyone who wants to pop up in person. And again, I think a lot of the fun in this, as it is in person, will be some of the sidebar conversations that you all will have in those evenings, in the early mornings. We do want this to be a collaborative effort where everyone leaves with a new business partner, I don't know, a new spouse, whatever you need. We'll try to get it down there and make it all happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, interesting question. What does this partnership look like longitudinally? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know, James. I don't know what you think about it. I mean, I hope it's the beginning of a long relationship. I think that this is something that I think it can only strengthen both of our, I don't want to say our sides because we're on the same side, but represent two very different pillars or two very complementary pillars. And I think that I hope that it will also set a precedent, because I've seen a lot of fragmentation in DI. There's like everybody has their own way of approaching it. Everybody has their own, and it feels like there's a lot of fiefdoms and people that are like trying to say my idea is better, your idea is better. I think that we need to show that ultimately we're all trying to row in the same direction, and being fragmented only hurts us as a field because it gives us less credibility and less visibility. So hopefully this will go for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's basically what I've been thinking. My hope is that this is, again, the beginning of, this is the first in-person conference that we're doing on my end, but this is something that we want to do. We think that it's necessary infrastructure for the long term, something in decades into the future. And Paulo is right. I think everyone's in their silo. As I was talking to the CDO in Atlanta earlier, her name is Candace Stansel. Find her on LinkedIn, follow her. She said, I love what you all are doing, because she normally only engages in the government faction of what we're doing. Whereas I think Paulo and I fit in two different areas, even though we all have the same objective, and all of our organizations are orgs that require some of the same basic infrastructure. So I think hopefully it's the beginning of not only a beautiful relationship, but a formidable one, in that I'll just say, for me, to be overly transparent about why I'm doing this work at all, my biggest fear is not necessarily replacing one power majority with a different power majority. And that looks different in every country, whether we're talking about the white population here in the United States or the Hindu population in India. It's really about subduing abuses of power. And I think about my own organization in that space. If we get as big as I would like us to get, I obviously am an entrepreneur. I run a for-profit corporation. We want to grow. I want checks and balances. And I don't want this raspy voice to be the one that is solely trying to make decisions about whatever inclusivity means. And so at first, when I approached Paulo, I was thinking, this should just be one big event. And while it could be one big event, it should arguably be a bunch of small organizations that don't necessarily see eye to eye about the method of execution. And I think that level of intentional democratization of how we might disagree is what will make us more valuable over the long term. So I don't think that we need to necessarily replace what either of the two of us are doing, but we need to force ourselves to do the same work that we ask other companies to do, which is try to see if we can work together to create an industry that is worth pushing all of these countries and all these industries forward, because we got 10 billion people to employ. They're not here yet. We're gonna have them in the next 2 generations, and we got to figure out how we're gonna help them plug into the normal economy. I worry about that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I see people thinking, yeah, looking forward to the collaboration with academia. So yeah, we're looking forward to collaboration with both sides. It'll be very exciting.
Yeah.
All right, I think
All right,
we're probably hanging up at this point, but thank you so much to all of you who participated, and please spread the word. And again, look out for a link to the registration for Dirk, the tickets to be ready in a couple of weeks, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Yep, looking forward to it. We'll see you all online or in person. We'll be in touch.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yep. All right, how do I do this?